Hey, it's Matt Pinfield. Welcome to KLOS New and Approved. My guest today has done so many amazing things. He's been a friend of mine for close to 3 decades now. It's incredible. And he's got some great new music out that we'll be talking about. And that's Tom Morello. Tom, it's great to see you, man. How are
Hey,
you?
how's it going, Matt? Always a pleasure. What's up, man?
It's so good to see you. You know, I think one of the last times we were probably out together was before the pandemic, right? We were out at some shows, and
Yep,
for
yep,
Allison Hagendorf's birthday, our mutual friend that we love.
yep,
So
absolutely,
and then
absolutely.
and then things went a little nuts. But you've managed to stay busy, Tom, during this entire time. I mean, you've been so productive, and I want to talk first about the new record that's coming out, and we're going to be playing the new single. So let's talk about the new album, which is called The Atlas Underground Fire,
Yeah,
and it's great that you're back with new Atlas Underground material. Talk to me about putting this record together because the guest list is incredible.
sure, sure. Well, I mean, when the world shut down, I was really, it was the first time in my entire adult life that I did not feel creative. I, I have a studio. I'm in my studio now, but I don't know how to run the studio. Like, there's normally an engineer who sits here. The only knob that they allow me to touch in the studio is the volume knob. And so it really was a sort of a dark period where I was looking forward. There were going to be no shows. There was going to be no recording. I kind of didn't have any sort of outlet. And then, believe it or not, like the craziest thing happened. I was reading an interview with Kanye West where he said that he had recorded the vocals for several of his records on the voice memo of his phone. And I said, well, if that's good enough for the vocals for a Kanye West record, then could I record my guitar into it? So I recorded all of the guitar for this record and for the two EPs that preceded it on my phone. I've got a lot of nice microphones here in the studio, which I can just throw away right now, and then would sort of ship off these riffs and licks and whatnot to various producers. But the Atlas Underground Fire album is a collaborative record. It's the sister record to the Atlas Underground record that I put out in 2018. And on this record, I mean, there's Bruce Springsteen and Eddie Vedder, Bring Me the Horizon, Phantogram, Chris Stapleton, newer artists like Grandson, Mike Posner, Damian Marley is on this record. A great new female artist named Femme is on this record. Proto Hype, who we do like a slamming bass drop jam. Refused, and a Palestinian DJ named Sama are all on this record. And so it's the idea with this record, like the original Atlas Underground record, was to forge a collaboration, like global collaborations, while being stuck here in the bunker.
Yeah, I mean it's amazing with the stuff that you've done, and I look at the different tracks, and one of the most interesting things is obviously the track doing "Highway to Hell," the AC/DC song with Eddie Vedder and Bruce Springsteen. Now, you played with Bruce Springsteen. You were his guitarist for a long time, and we'll have to talk about that. But and then Eddie, you've been contemporaries and friends with for literally from the very beginning of both your careers.
Yeah.
So tell me about how that collaboration came about.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the idea of doing AC/DC's Highway to Hell with Bruce Springsteen and Eddie Vedder is, like that's a sentence that kind of leaps off the paper. It's one of the greatest rock and roll songs of all time, sung by two of the greatest rock and roll singers of all time. And then I play a shredding guitar solo. I mean, thank you and good night. Like, that's kind of but how it came about was I was playing with the E Street Band over the course of a 6-year period. And we were in Australia, and the genesis of this Highway to Hell song began in Perth, the birthplace of Bon Scott, AC/DC's lead singer. And it was the night before the Springsteen show in Perth, and I went out looking for Bon Scott's grave. And there's this cemetery where Bon Scott is allegedly buried, and a friend and I are out there. It's about 11 o'clock at night, and there's no like marker for Bon Scott's grave. So we're kind of like just going gravestone to gravestone, trying to find Bon Scott's grave. And then out of the mists, we see a spooky light, a spooky round light coming towards us, and it's like it's a motorbike or something in the middle of the night in this cemetery. We're the only ones there, and this dude who's odd looking dude wearing like a German World War II helmet and a t-shirt that says, "I don't give a shit, but if I did, you'd be the one I'd give it to," comes riding out of the dark. And I'm like, if anybody knows where Bon Scott's grave is, it's going to be that dude. So we flag him down and I say, "Do you know where Bon Scott?" So he takes us to Bon Scott's grave. We pay our respects. I go back to the hotel later and having a drink in the bar with Bruce. I'm like, "Do you think that there's the possibility of the circle of the E Street Band and the circle of AC/DC intersecting?" And he said, I think there might be. And I gave him a couple of songs titles to sort of check out. He went upstairs, and the next day we began rehearsing AC/DC's Highway to Hell. Now, as coincidence would have it, a few days later, Eddie Vedder was on a solo tour in Australia, and we crossed paths in Melbourne. And Eddie was coming down to the show. And I was getting ready for the show, and like a light bulb went off. Now, AC/DC is like the national band of Australia. Like, there's other great bands from Australia, but AC/DC is like the cornerstone band. So I said, what? I knock on Bruce's door. I'm like, I got an idea. What if we open the show with Highway to Hell and Eddie Vedder sings it with us? And he was like, that sounds like a pretty good idea. So we open the show, and imagine like you're a Bruce Springsteen fan, you're Australian, you've come to the show, you're in a soccer stadium with 80,000 people, and the chords of Highway to Hell ring out, da 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 da, and then there's Eddie Vedder too. The place came absolutely unhinged, and it was really one of the peak moments of my rock and roll life on stage, playing one of my favorite band songs with two of my favorite singers. So in making this record, I was pretty deep into the record. Had the great tracks with a lot of like these kind of newer artists, and I reflected back to that day, and I said, let's see if those guys are game for really giving this, like doing an update of AC/DC's Highway to Hell with their tremendous king of rock and roll voices on it, and that's exactly what we did. So we've got the lead track for this record is Highway to Hell, Bruce Springsteen, Eddie Vedder, and I shred some solos.
It came out so great. It's just so good to hear them switch off. Bruce starting, Eddie coming afterwards, and your riffs. It's amazing. How were those years too, Tom? Being out on the road with Bruce. I mean, and I know he ended up reaching out to you. Is that how that all happened?
Yeah, well, I'm not a casual fan of Bruce Springsteen. Like he's the only friend of mine that I subscribe to a fanzine about.
Backstreets, is that the one?
We were friends for like 8 years before we ever played a note of music together. But he was making, I think, the Magic record with Brendan O'Brien, and I just came by the studio, and he's like, you should come play with us sometime. And I was like, really? I'm going to remember that. So, a couple of weeks later, they were playing in Anaheim. So I call him up, like, hey, remember the other day in the studio when you said I should come play with you guys sometime? How about tomorrow night? And he was like, sure, come on down. What do you want to play? And now Rage Against the Machine had covered the song The Ghost of Tom Joad, which is a minor key ballad from an acoustic record of his. And Bruce, I have made some acoustic records myself. Bruce has been in Night Watchman shows. So I said, how about Ghost of Tom Joad? He said, great. He said, be prepared to play it acoustic or electric. I'm like, fantastic. So I don't get nervous for too much, Matt. And I've spent literally all night practicing that and singing that and getting it ready. So I go down to Anaheim to rehearsal, to sound check. He's like, get there about 4:30. I'll run the band through it. You come up on stage at 5 and we'll run through it a couple times. It'll be great. But there's an awful surprise. When I hear the band playing the song, Bruce has changed the key of the song and he's raised it like 8 notes. And you can tell from my rich milk chocolate baritone voice that singing higher might not be the best thing for me. So I get on stage and I don't know the chords now. I'm trying to transpose the chords, which is not really my forte, and the notes are kind of high. And Steve Van Zandt, bless his heart, he's there and he's like, he sees me kind of panicking. He's like, baby, it's gonna be. I'm like, yes, it's bad, baby. It's not going very well. But they don't call Bruce Springsteen the boss for nothing. Bruce comes over, he recognizes my state of anxiety, puts a hand on my shoulder, looks me in the eye and says, Tommy, first of all, I think it's awesome that Bruce Springsteen calls me Tommy. He says, Tommy, we're going to do it in this key, and it's going to be great. And I'm like, well, thanks, Jedi Master Yoda, but I still don't know how to play any of the chords and whatnot. But it dawns on me that like there's 15 people in the E Street Band. They know the chords already. Can I sing a song of social justice? Yes, I can. Can I play a shredding guitar solo? Of course I can. So the rest of the sound check, I hold back. I don't give anything away in the guitar solo. So then that night, when he calls me on stage and a half a bottle of Jameson later, I get up there and we have a moment on stage that was really transcendent. And none of us, me, Bruce, the E Street Band, like I was playing this, the song was going, I playing the solo, he's just like, keep going, keep going, keep going. It took me into some sort of like astral place where I had never been on the guitar before. I don't know the E Street Band had ever been in that particular lane before, and we finished, and gave me a big hug afterwards and said, Bruce, you were right. That was the right key after all. And that led to us playing together for the next 6 years or so.
Yeah, it was amazing. I got to see you guys do the song together too. I think at Austin City Limits Theater. Remember that show? It was great. It was really good to see you do that there. Tom, it's amazing. You've been doing, working with a lot of different people over the years. Recently, it was great what you did with Taylor Momsen and the Pretty Reckless.
Sure.
And let's talk about that because, and so it went. She said that when she wrote that song and was working on it, she goes, I could just hear Tom Morello playing this lead. It's just like I heard it in my head. Tell me how that came about.
Yeah, well, we connected at the Chris Cornell Memorial Show. That's where we really met, and we may have crossed paths before, but that's where we really met. And and over that, it was a very sort of sad and but deeply sort of important occasion. And we played a Soundgarden. We played Loud Love together, Soundgarden and her and I, and Wayne Kramer on that one too. But we connected then, exchanged numbers, and she called me up and said, I've got this song. And I was on tour. I was on the Atlas Underground tour, and really I had no time in the studio. But I was like, I wanted to come through for her. So she's like, the deadline's coming up. Can you rock this thing? I'm like, I will rock it today. So basically just set up at sound check of my own show. I think we were in like Buffalo or something. I don't even know. We're in Buffalo or somewhere. And I gave it I kind of ripped through it a couple of times, had my engineer kind of put the solo together. And I think it's a really, really great song. I think for her, it was a #1 rock song for weeks and weeks and weeks. And, I really appreciate her as someone who, she started as like, with an acting career, but really felt that her heart was in a different place in hard rock and heavy metal music, and has really stuck to her guns. And that her success is one that is, it was an honor to be a part of that song, and I'm very proud of her and for her success.
Yeah, it just it came out great, and she's killing it. I mean, the album was like #1 in about 11 countries, so I'm so happy to see her doing so well, and she lets you know what music she loves and what she's loved growing up and what's important to her. And you are definitely one of those people. Hey, Tom, speaking of the Audio Slave days and Chris, tell me about that one first meeting when you guys went down to that house to see him.
Yeah. So Tim and Brad and I were spending a lot of time hanging out at Rick Rubin's house. Rick had produced the last Rage record, and we wanted him to be a part of whatever it was that we were doing. And so we would listen to a lot of records, watch a lot of videos, but the record we kept returning to was Soundgarden's Bad Motor Finger, and particularly the song Slaves and Bulldozers. And we'd sit there in, Rick's kind of listening room with it roaring through the speakers, going like, that guy is, not only obviously he has a fantastic voice, but there's something a little scary about it and the lyrical content. And I was like, what's that guy really like? Like you listen to those songs and they are dark and smart and deep and little twisted. And so called him up. He was living up in Ojai, which is about an hour and a half north of Los Angeles. And so I'm like, can we come just have a chat? So Rick and I get in my old 1985 Chevrolet Astrovan and drive up to Ojai. Now Rick doesn't go anywhere. And like if he's going somewhere, it's in a Rolls Royce that's like inside another Rolls Royce. So it's a big deal for him to like get in my van to go talk to Chris Cornell. So we drive up there. And it's around dusk, and of course Chris lives at the last loneliest mansion at the top of the last loneliest hill. The skies are darkening. It's kind of wooded around. We're winding up this hill. We pull in, and it's this kind of old sort of Spanish style house with these big oaken doors, and the skies are dark. We pull in. There's a couple of motorcycles out front, and we're looking at this long stairway that leads up. And then I swear to you, Addams Family style, like the front doors of the house, like open, like seemingly without anyone opening them. And Chris was 6'2", 6'3", with his long, lanky Nosferatu-like frame. And he starts, loping slowly coming down the stairs. And Rick turns to me and goes, let's get the fuck out of here. Like feeling like our souls were imperiled. And so fortunately we had the courage to risk, a bloodletting, and spent some time with Chris then. And it was the beginning of, really a great, 6 years together as Audio Slave. And I'm really proud of those records that we made. And, in that friendship and that, I was a friend of Chris, I was a bandmate of Chris, but I never stopped being a fan of Chris. And it's always been, while it's terribly tragic that he is gone, that we still have his music. And one thing I know for sure is he will never be outshined.
No, that's for sure. He was absolutely amazing. Beautiful person and an incredible talent. He was amazing. Speaking of songs like that, I mean, what was the writing process like back then too? I've always loved if you take like a Stone and just what you play and the different things that you bring to that song, and of course many of the Audioslave songs, or all of them really. But then there's that incredible riff and that lead that you do in the middle of that song that is just it's so signature. Never sounded like anything else that before it. What was the writing process like when you were working with Chris on that?
Yeah, it was really easy. I mean, Chris had shouldered a lot of the burden of like the musical songwriting in Soundgarden, and in Audioslave, he's like, I don't want to do that. I want to concentrate on sort of words and melody, and it really made an expansive palette for Tim and Brad and I to, like push us in different directions to write in different ways. And, a big part of my like playing prior to Rage Against the Machine was chordal and harmonic and all of that, which now kind of came to full flower. And the one thing about Chris was like, no matter what you threw at him, whether it was a simple chord progression or a complicated heavy riff, he could instantly sort of pull out of the ether great melodies, great and terrifying melodies. And that was the case with Like a Stone. So we worked on that song. And the day that we wrote that song in the studio together, when it came time for the solo section, I played basically what was the solo that ended up on the record. It was like a one take, just sort of jamming along with that chord progression, which kind of pushed my playing in different ways. And fortunately we were recording it that day, so when it came time to like really record the song in the studio, I had that as a reference. But to me, it was one of those moments where you just have the antenna up, and that kind of came down from the cosmos at that moment in that rehearsal somewhere in the San Fernando Valley. And I was glad we recorded it, because that's really what ended up on the record. I will say this, that it's a lot of the songwriting process, depending on the band or the situation. Like, for example, writing in a room with Audioslave was very, very different from making this Atlas Underground record, where I made it literally alone in this room,
Yeah.
and recording stuff like Highway to Hell. I recorded all the guitar parts here while, I think Eddie was maybe in Hawaii and Bruce was in New Jersey and the producer was over here. And so like each circumstance of creativity, it's like different vectors that lead to different results. Like if we had tried to record an Audioslave song with four of us in different rooms, it would have been very different than Like a Stone. It might have been just as good, who knows? But in making these Atlas Underground records from here, it's really kind of twisted and shifted the way that I write songs, and pushing me into different sort of creative spheres, where it's allowed me to make guitar solos that are different than the ones that I did then, but hopefully forward looking.
Yeah, and speaking of which, I love what you did with Bloody Beetroots. I've interviewed him before, and talk to me about this EP, because
Sure.
Radium Girls is such a great song. I mean, it just sounds so good. The first time I heard it, it grabbed a hold of me. Talk to me about that EP.
Sure. Well, like I said, for the first 4 months of this lockdown, I didn't make any music whatsoever, and then it really became recording and sending these riffs out into the world to producers and other artists. Really was a life raft, and it became, this last year is the most prolific recording period of my entire life. In last October, I put out an EP. Then I did a Bloody Beetroots EP called The Catastrophe. The Commandante was the EP in last October, where I did a song with Slash, covered Voodoo Child. Then comes The Catastrophist, which came out a couple of months ago, which was an EP with Bloody Beetroots. And he was really sort of the beginning of leading me out of sort of the dark anxiety of pandemic times, because I could send him, like I'd write a riff, record it always just directly into my phone, send it to him. He lives in Italy. I'm up a little earlier with the kids. He's up later being an EDM Italian producer. And he would send me something back, in 7 or 8 minutes. It would be like a video of his computer screen where he's working on Pro Tools. And I just sent him a couple of riffs, and all of a sudden it's this huge groove. And that's what was the basis of the Catastrophist EP. And then getting some, the song Radium Girls was the single from that, and getting some great artists, collaborators like Pussy Riot and Last International, and the Interrupters on that one.
Yeah, some really great people.
And I will say this, Bloody Beetroots, he has got produced a couple songs on this as well. The track with Damian Marley called The Achilles List, which is just a huge, Damian Marley has never flowed over a groove so heavy. And it's with his kind of deeply authentic voice and character and gravitas, and with one of my huge riffs and Bloody Beetroots, production is pretty awesome. And then the band Refused, which is a Scandinavian band, which is was kind of like the Northern European Rage Against the Machine politically, but really an uncompromising band that I've loved for years. Bloody Beetroots, and we did a song together called Save Our Souls on this upcoming Atlas Underground Fire record.
I can't wait for this record. It's going to be amazing. And speaking of Rage, I mean, one of the things being a guy who was in radio and then, of course, playing your videos on MTV, but when all of a sudden people started playing Killing in the Name on the radio, one of the first things you guys said was you would not edit your own song. I mean, which I thought was pretty interesting. So it was kind of left up to us. Me as like a music director, program director. This guy Jim McGuinn up in like Manchester, Vermont did a really killer edit. I mean, everybody had their own kind of edit of it to play it for FCC regulations. But tell me about what it was like at that period of time with like the record company. I mean, were they pressuring you and you guys just said absolutely not?
Well, first of all, I'd say, I mean, Michael Goldstone, who was the guy who signed Rage Against the Machine to Epic Records, he signed Pearl Jam as well, and Mother Love Bone to MCA, and he was really like a great. He also runs the record company that my Atlas Underground records come out.
Mom and Pop.
So we've had a
great
decades long collaborative relationship, and he's the one. We turned in 12 songs for our record, and he's the one that said, I think the single should be the song with 16 fuck yous and one motherfucker in it, which is Killing in the Name. And we're like, the single. He's like, yeah, that should be the single. I'm like, this is a different kind of record company thinking than than what we were accustomed to before. But then it came, the song was a huge hit in Europe and around the world where they don't have the same sort of censorship restrictions. And so here it couldn't get played because we wouldn't edit the content, and the FCC was not going to allow 16 FUs and one MRFer. And so it was, it was a complicated time because the radio stations were making their own edits. And then how did we feel about that? And the band was getting bigger, but then the British record company was selling more records than the American record company, which was sort of shaming them, but they didn't have the same tools to work with. And meanwhile, we're on a band just out in the van or in the bus, just trying to survive. So it was a complicated time. And at the end of the day, that song did get into a lot of people's ears. And I think that those that did hear it on the radio in some edited form, whether you were a program director or whatever, when they did go home and buy the record and they listened to the part that they had missed, I don't think they were disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of times what we did was just cut out the words or like replace it with a beat, so you knew what you were saying. You knew what Zach was saying in that period of time. What did you think about when the song went to #1 for Christmas over in the UK? And they,
this is something that's hard to understand in the United States because in the UK they have a thing called the Christmas #1, where there's the #1 pop song in the country on Christmas morning is a big deal. People bet on it, like they bet on the Kentucky Derby here.
Yeah, they do.
You wager on it, and everyone, is thinking about it. Everyone sits around with their figgy pudding, on Christmas morning, listening to the top 10, and then there's the #1, and everybody knows what it is. So the last 5 years previous to this event that happened, Simon Cowell's show, The X Factor, which was a big deal over there, they kind of scam the game where the X Factor show ended like the week of Christmas. So they would crown their champion who would sing some syrupy song which the whole country was watching. Everyone would run out to buy that single. And the Christmas #1 for five or six consecutive years was the X Factor schmaltz, right? Yeah. So this couple in suburban London had enough. And Rage Against the Machine had nothing to do with this. This couple in suburban London just made a Facebook page to try to make Rage Against the Machine's Killing in the Name, which at the time was 17 years old. The 17-year-old song, the #1 pop song in the country, instead of the X Factor song. And it got momentum. And people were like, yeah, screw X Factor, screw that kind of, corporate music, Killing in the Name. And there were all of a sudden there were 500,000 people on this thing. And then we got wind of it from some of our, like my longtime guitar tech emailed me. He's like, do you know what's happening over here with your guys' song? I have no idea. I'm ready to go back to Chicago for Christmas. And he said, I think that you guys have a chance to have a #1 pop song. And anyway, so we got together, we played, we did a promotional event for the song that was, where they said, okay, the only thing you can't, it was like on Good Morning America, like whatever the British equivalent is of Good Morning America, yeah. Rage Against the Machine is playing on that. And the one thing they say is the only thing you can't do on this show is say the swear words.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the refrain of the song is F you, I won't do what you tell me. And then they told us to not say the swear words. Right. So that's a little preamble. So we're on the air. The whole country's watching this. It's on the front cover, like this battle between this Facebook Rage Against the Machine campaign and the X Factor. It's on the front cover of all the tabloids. And we appear on Good Morning America. And, Zach whispers the first 8 of the FU. And then when the beat comes in, he does not hold back. And it's, it was like a Sex Pistols moment. So it's even bigger press. Anyway, it turns out that we had the #1 pop single in the country, the Christmas #1, that was like this people's campaign to unseat the X Factor. And as we promised that if that did happen, we would play a free show for the entire country. And while they couldn't fit the entire country into Finsbury Park, they did fit about 90,000 of them for a free show that was really one of the peak moments of our rock lives.
It's amazing. And you were mentioning about going back home to Chicago, Libertyville, Illinois is where you're from originally. I remember getting a T-shirt from you from Libertyville back in the 90s. Which
I'm
was
representing
really cool.
the hat. The hat here that's Libertyville.
That's the start right there, which is great. The story is so great for those who've not heard it before. And I just love you coming up, you and Adam Jones in school together. 2 incredible guitar players, 2 different styles, but guys who were friends, who loved rock and roll. Can you kind of tell that story and set that picture for everybody?
Sure. Well, Libertyville is it's about an hour north of Chicago. It's an archly conservative suburb. And I literally integrated the town. I was the first person of color to ever reside within its borders, according to the real estate agent that helped my mom and I get an apartment there in 1965. And so baked into this was a lot of that, like teen angst was high, and sort of rebelling against the strictures of this conservative town was kind of what I was a member of the drama club. That was sort of my outlet, was like being in plays and stuff. And Adam Jones, who later surfaced in a band called Tool, we went to school together. We played in a band together called the Electric Sheep. And there were 3 bands in our high school, and we were the worst of those 3 bands. There was a band called Destiny, which was beautiful guys who played like beautiful kind of like Styx and REO Speedwagon. And then there was Epitaph, and they were bad boys, and they played AC/DC and Black Sabbath. Then there was the drama club band, the Electric Sheep, who didn't have the technical ability or the talent to play other people's songs, so we were cursed to write our own. And Adam Jones and I have written a lot of songs since, so maybe it wasn't the worst start after all.
It's pretty amazing if you think about it. Both of you having incredibly successful bands and doing all that. And I wonder where the guy from Destiny is today.
Well, I did hear from I relayed a story on another radio show recently about there was sort of a bit of a battle of the bands back in the day, where it was like a formative moment for me. It was like the moment where I was inhabited by the Holy Spirit of rock and roll. It was like a show about the 60s, and their band played like a Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young song. They were very tremendously talented singers, and they were great. And we were tasked with learning Born to Be Wild, the Steppenwolf song, which it took us 2 months to barely get together. And so, they had played and everyone enjoyed that, and all the, the pretty girls were weeping and at their beauty of their singing and of their hair. And then out come Adam and I with our guitars barely in tune, and we're playing Born to Be Wild, and the keyboard player comes in on the wrong chord, and the bass player comes in on the wrong note, and it's an inauspicious start to our musical careers. But I did have a bit of a track and field background and was a limber lad. And when the first chorus came, I read the room and it was not going great. So we were on this riser, and I leapt off the riser. And when I leapt off the riser, the roof came off the place. It's like people were like, wait, rock and roll, like there's distorted guitars and leaping, and they went crazy. And that sort of, I smelled blood in the water and just kept like rocking harder. And by the end of the song, like, we may have not been in tune, we may not have been in time, but it was clear that something that was very rock and roll had occurred. And Destiny was a very talented band, and they're lovely guys, and I won't say one bad word about them because they're Libertyville musicians, and we're going to stick together. Yeah. But that night might have belonged to the Electric Sheep.
I'm glad that you guys ended up pulling that off. Speaking of bands you loved as a kid, you and I were both just part of the Kiss Story, which was the A&E documentary, which was really cool. And it was great to see your passion in there. It always is, to see your passion for the musicians you loved. Talk to me about, besides Kiss, who were the other artists, the bands that you loved as a kid? Who were the bands that drove you?
Matt, I was an only child. And so there were no older brothers or sisters passing down records. My mom was, not a record collector. She might have had a record by War and a record by The Temptations and a classical album in the house. But like, I discovered all my own music on my own. And my first discovery was Kiss. Bought the Destroyer record at a grocery store, and they were my favorite band before I listened to one note of music. I was a comic book collector, and all of a sudden here were these superheroes on the cover, and then it was Detroit Rock City and God of Thunder and Shout Out Loud. I'm like, oh, I'm all the way in on that. But for me, the other bands were, so then I would buy magazines that had Kiss on the cover, and that led me to Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and AC/DC. Here's the thing, and which leads us to our conversation today, this cover song of AC/DC with Eddie Vedder and Bruce Springsteen, that's the lead track from the Atlas Underground Fire record, is like, those bands are so deeply ingrained in my bones, and I'm a fan of hip hop, and I'm a fan of punk rock music, and there's music that has greater lyrical depth than, some of those songs, but that music that first ignited me to want to feel the way that, to try to create something to make other people feel the way that I felt when I dropped the needle on Highway to Hell, or when I dropped the needle on God of Thunder, or Achilles List, or Trampled Underfoot. That was that initial motivation that came from those bands like Kiss and AC/DC.
Which I think is great, And so I love this album. There's 12 tracks that are coming out on it. I haven't heard the whole record, but I love what I see is coming. And I love the Springsteen and Eddie Vedder song with you. Talk to me about some of the other things that are going to be coming, because I know there's probably another album's worth of material. And it's recently, there was an article where you were working with Alex Lifeson of Rush, who I know we're both big Rush fans, and Kirk Hammett of Metallica. Tell me about that experience.
Yeah. Well, the thing about this Atlas Underground project is there's an embarrassment of riches, because once I got rolling, like, I would come up here to the studio, and there's a lot of, we were really locked down here. Like, my mom, Mary Morello, is 97 years old. My mother-in-law is 90. They were here during the whole lockdown period. So we were, protecting the grandmas was job one. So there was nobody in or out. So my only kind of means of communication, my means of contact beyond the walls of my house, were these musical collaborations. And so I just kept going. And it wasn't even, I was like, I think this is an Atlas Underground record, but it just kept going. And maybe there's material for maybe even another one. But I did jam virtually with Alex Lifeson and Kirk Hammett. And again, it was around the same time that I reached out to Eddie and to Eddie Vedder and Bruce. I was just thinking, like, I actually ran into Kirk Hammett at a film shoot where we might be in a film together at some point. But and I was like, you know what? I've never played with any of the dudes in Metallica, and Kurt's the loveliest guy.
Yeah.
And so I got back and I said, I had this one track that was just kind of like steamrolling. It had like sort of some bass drops in it, but I thought, what if we really did a full on, crossroads, cutting heads guitar duel with Kirk Hammett, Alex Lifeson, and myself. And I got that together. So that's not on this record, but that will be coming down the pike. I mean, one of the reasons why I was so fired up about that was, I did a song with Slash called Interstate 80 about half a year ago, and I just love that. And we were not in the room, like, shredding head to head, but you feel it on the record. And, like when you're playing with Slash, or when you're playing with Alex Lifeson or Kirk Hammett, all of whom are guitar heroes of mine, like, you got to bring your A game. Like, when you're in your own, I can, here's a nice melodic one, here's a nice R2D2 barnyard animal sounding noise one. But when you know that, like, the next bar is going to be one of those guys, like, your bars have to be together. Yeah. So it was a great challenge, and I love playing with them.
I cannot wait to hear that when that is done. It's going to be amazing. I love the fact that even on the Bloody Beetroots, you had your mom on your mom made it to the record. It's been incredible. Your relationship and your love for your mom, Tom, is amazing. I mean, and your mom was such a smart incredible woman. I've heard you talk about her before many
Yeah.
times. And can you tell me about that incredible relationship? Because I know
Sure. Well, Mary Morello is a very unique person. She, at 97 years old, she remains the most popular and the most radical member of the Morello family. I still, like, my studio is still in her basement. She's up, upstairs right now, probably having brunch. And but she raised me as a single mom. She raised an African American child as a single mom in an all white conservative town. She was a radical teacher in a conservative high school that just turned people's minds inside out to, like, she was talking about the Cesar Chavez Great Boycott, and about the Black Panthers, and about the Vietnam War to this audience of kids that just had never heard a perspective like hers before. And for me, it gave me, even though there was racism and stuff in my home. There was once, like, a noose in my family's garage and stuff like that. There was racism in my hometown,
wow.
but I never felt any lesser. I always was instilled with a tremendous amount of confidence because of kind of the love and support I had from her and from her family. So then, like, I went to Harvard University. No one from my town had ever gone to Harvard before. Not that I was smarter than anybody else. Nobody ever applied before. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was not, the bar was not set super high for Libertyville Public High School. But then when I graduated, with a degree in political science, and said, I'm going to move to Hollywood to try to join a heavy metal band, try to form a heavy metal band and foment dissent. She was like, okay, great. Will you be home for Thanksgiving? There was never like that's insane, what's wrong with you? And that's insane. She was always completely supportive. And it was knowing that I had that kind of like she had my back, no matter what my decisions were, made me confident in all of my endeavors. And, that's one of the reasons why, I put her on my record. She's actually on the Atlas Underground Fire record too. There's a song called Charmed, I'm Sure, which has 3 generations of Morellos on it.
Yeah, it does. It's got one of your sons as well.
It's got my kids. It's got both my kids on it. They have a couple of kidisms that we've kind of stretched, and they're like, "Let's go!" So
that's cool that you did that with the whole 3 generations. That's incredible. Yeah. And give yourself some credit too, man. You really are smart. I mean, you did really great at Harvard, but there's a reason for that. No question about it. Excuse me, because I mean, you've always been able to speak and really defend your point of view, no matter what, and get it across. I mean, you're so good at that, and it's one of the things I've always admired. Besides your incredible playing, is there a plan to take Atlas Underground on the road again and do some shows? That's what I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah, that's I would say they're around the release of the record. Hopefully we'll be able to do some promotional things. As far as right now, touring is completely up in the air, and there's looking forward to, we've rebooked the Rage Against the Machine dates for 2022, and so that's what the idea is. I've recorded a tremendous amount of music. There'll be 2 EPs and 1 or 2 records before the end of this year. And then I want to clear the deck so that if people are able to tour in 2022, that we're able to do that full bore.
That's great. And when you see every time there's an article, Tom, that says bands that should make another record, and you always see that when it comes to Rage. And what's your feeling on that? I mean, it's just you never say never.
People
right?
love records, and I love records too. You know what I mean? Like, that's a question probably better for when you got all 4 Rage guys sitting here to ask them.
Exactly. But it's amazing. But at least I mean, look at the body of incredible work you've already done and continue to do. There's so much great stuff.
Yeah. Well, this Atlas Underground Fire record will be, I think, my 21st album. And and it's been, I never would have imagine, and there's a lot of diverse stuff. There's the Night Watchman records, which are acoustic Americana records. There's 2 records, 2 Bruce Springsteen records that I played on. There's the Audioslave records, the Street Sweeper Social Club records, the Rage Against the Machine records. My first record, Lockup, which came out in 1988, which has probably the worst album title of any album in Western music, which is Something Bitchin' This Way Comes.
That's great. Yeah. Well, at the time, it probably sounded like
that was not my idea. I'm just making it perfectly clear that was not my idea.
That's amazing.
But yeah, to these Atlas Underground records, which the first one, which came out in 2018, it was like it was a way, people are always, counting out guitar, it's cyclical, but regularly people are counting out guitar, people are counting out guitar music. And, I've seen it come and go. And, it was really in the early 90s, or it was more like the sort of the late when like hip hop was ascendant, and people were like, you don't need guitars anymore because you can just sample them, or like turntablists can sample them. And that really made me think like, well, they're trying to make guitars obsolete. I said, well, what if I incorporated turntable sounds into my analog Marshall stack playing to try to make them obsolete? To me, I've always looked, I've never been like sort of dug my heels and gone, well, rock and roll has to be played exactly like Chuck Berry or it's not rock and roll. To me, when I've had my kind of creative breakthroughs on the instrument, it's been pushing the boundaries of what the guitar is. And that's absolutely the case, on the Atlas Underground records. And this one in particular, it's like, it's this kind of cyborg stuff. Like my stuff has sounded like hip hop music or like EDM music when it's all just my hands and a Marshall stack. So on these records, you just can't tell like where the guitar begins and where some of the maybe more electronic components end. And I love that because it's like I've always loved to play records where you just kind of go like, what the fuck? Like I have no idea what that guy's doing on the record,
Yeah.
And then I've got, I also spent 8 hours a day for years getting my chops together too. So that was, sort of during the alternative period, there were very, very few guitar players that had that kind of heavy metal spandex gunslinger background, that I did. So I've got that arrow in my quiver too. So just trying to combine all of those elements, on this record, the Atlas Underground Fire, and on the song Highway to Hell, like the one thing that when I sent I recorded the song here in the studio and I sent it to Bruce, like with my fingers crossed. And because the E Street Band version had been kind of maybe more like sort of a traditional rock and roll E Street Band version of the song. And this one, like there's like guitar. I'm like, Bruce, I want you to shred some guitar on this with me. And it's got and he was like, I think that he got in the studio, he did 2 passes on it right away. And we were like, and done.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I'm really excited about hearing the rest of the record, Tom. I just got to tell you.
Anytime, Matt, you can come over anytime. Wear a mask. Come on over. Me, you and Mom will listen to it together.
Yeah, love to hang with your mom and you. It's it's amazing. I think about it. It's got to be now at least 25, 26 years since the first time you and I went out for Indian food in New York City on Indian Row.
Sure,
we've been friends and done so many things over the years, and it's just so great to continue our friendship and to see all the great music that you bring us all the time. And it's just
well, thank you. I've said it before. I think I say it every time that we do meet like this. But you also helped me do my master class too. Like you were a integral part of that. Like I don't know if like the voice off screen in the master class is Matt Pinfield, who's sort of asking these insightful and probing questions while I'm revealing the secrets of the electric guitar. So we have a long history, and I've always been so appreciative of the breadth and the depth of your knowledge. Like you are for fans of rock and roll, for fans of music more broadly, not just rock and roll music, that you are a national treasure. And hearing your voice, continuing today and into the future is very, very important. And I just want you to know that you are appreciated.
Man, thank you so much, Tom. Well, listen, take care, and thank you for spending the time with me today. And we look forward to hearing the rest of the new Atlas Underground album, Fire. It's going to be great. Appreciate your kind words, too, Tom. And it was so great catching up with you and telling all the stories. And
always a pleasure, Matt.
All right, we'll see you soon. Thank you so much, Tom.
Cheers.
Tom Morello, everybody. You're watching KLOS New and Approved. I'm Matt Pinfield, and we'll be back. See you soon.